In this episode of Geeking Out, join me as I bring you 3 DC comics you need to read for that spooky time of year, or anytime really, if you're a horror fan. Before the multiverse became a trend, we had What If and Elseworld comics, which were designed originally to answer those random questions that we had. Well, what if Jane Foster became Thor? What if Superman arrived in the Soviet Union instead of Kansas? And so many more. While being fun stories to read, it gave writers that freedom to really play around with the established characters without worry that it will affect the canon at that time. Some stories fit so well it pretty much becomes canon. Think The Killing Joke, a classic story that really stresses the fact that the events in the story are one of many possibilities, but it's now widely regarded and accepted by editors and fans alike. Others started as complete what-if situations and later were merged or retreaded in the official canon. Like Jane Foster, who I mentioned earlier, who became Thor in the official Marvel Comics, and it really had long-term impacts, which eventually led to her appearance in Thor Love and Thunder. Whatever the reason, or the outcome, writers have used this method as an outlet to bring some characters into different genres. And since I'm writing this now during Halloween season, and, like I mentioned earlier, for all those people who can watch horror all year round, today we'll be going over 3 classic horror stories that exist outside of the DC canon that have some very different and alternate takes on characters. One takes 2 established icons and merges them together into one creepy story, another that reworks a classic zombie trope into an epic that redefines many characters, and the first on the list has a fairly modern movie monster take on one of DC's heavy hitters. So, with all that being said, let's dive in.
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!
In terms of modern movie monsters, you have everything from the Xenomorphs in the Alien series to a slasher like J.C. Voorhees. But what makes things different with the Predator series is the nature of the monsters themselves. The Predator is not a singular monster, but rather the Predators are a group of aliens known as the Yautja, whose only goal is to become the universe's ultimate hunters, and they do this of course by hunting the strongest and most deadliest foes on the planets they land on. These could be dangerous wildlife or the deadliest warriors of the planets. These hunts can also be coming of age rituals or even just mass hunts. The beauty of the Predator stories as a franchise is that the characters don't always follow from story to story, and the setting can be totally different from one another and still work. In the first movie they were in a jungle, the next in the city, and they're not even bound by time, as one of the more recent versions had a Predator go up against Native Americans and early settlers. The Predator is no stranger to comics either, especially the crossovers. The most well-known has to be the Alien vs. Predator series, which has everything from comics to novels, and of course the movies where they fight the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise on Earth. During the 90s though, comic crossovers was the thing. We got everything from DC vs. Marvel, Superman and Spider-Man, and everything in between. But one of the cooler ones was the Batman vs. Predator crossover. The series feels like a natural fit for both franchises, as these books were more grounded, focusing on Gotham and the Batman family, as opposed to appearances from other overpowered heroes like Superman, because then it would take the fun out of it. Superman fighting the Predator would be interesting, but it's hard to really make an argument for the Predator beating Superman by himself. So by taking that part of the DC out of the storyline, you get a grounded Batman story mixed with the action of a Predator movie. The multiple crossovers deal with the Predators coming to Gotham City to take on the best of the best within the city. In the first crossover, Batman is investigating the deaths of several people, including a boxer and some mobsters, which leads him to a near-deadly first confrontation with the Predator, with Batman barely escaping with his life. Recovering from his injuries, he builds another stronger batsuit to confront the Predator, and eventually beats it. The real magic of this series is that it really feels like a Predator movie. The art style is very stylistic, having this old school animation style which reminded me very much of the work done by artist Neil Adams, who worked on the Batman books during the late 60s and early 70s. Take that and combine that with the grittiness of, let's say, the Frank Miller aesthetic. Add a slow build with a great fight scene between the two, a plot that for the most part makes sense within the world of Batman and the world of Predators. In a live action setting, this story makes a lot of sense. A lot more sense than the Predator vs. Alien series in that there's very little setup needed, as the Predators know Gotham has some heavy hitters that can provide them with a good challenge. I feel a lot of crossovers spend so much more time trying to set up how and why these two franchises would come together in the first place, and that takes away from them. A lot of times there's plot holes or things that would be too convenient and easy just so they can get to a point where the characters meet. On the other hand, this series seemed to really integrate the lore of these two worlds effortlessly, while also not being the most complicated story to begin with, but really entertaining. For Predator fans and Batman fans, I think this will be a fun read for you guys. So we all know about Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, or I'm just going to assume everyone at least has some vague idea about the character. The classic monster first appeared in Mary Shelley's novel titled Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, released way back in 1818. The themes and ideas found in the Frankenstein story have bled into everything, from movies, TV shows, art, video games, and of course comics. Frankenstein and his monster has appeared in a lot of comics, everything from Marvel to DC to IDW, Dark Horse. DC has their own version of the monster within the canon who calls himself Frankenstein. He was part of the Seven Soldiers, Shade, and probably more well known for his time on the Creature Commandos. And for most of the time of his character, he's been a government secret agent who tries to save the world from weird and crazy stuff. This version is very cool and I like it a lot. And I have a whole video here that you can check out and learn more about him. But Frankenstein's monster has made other appearances in DC, including 2 stories under the Elseworlds banner. One in Batman Castle the Bat, which has Bruce Wayne becoming somewhat of a Dr. Frankenstein himself, experimenting with animal hybrids, bringing back to life his dead father. And this story does deserve a closer look, but the story I want to focus on and recommend to you guys is the Superman monster. The Superman monster is actually a prequel to another story called Batman Two Faces, which is basically a retelling of the Jekyll and Hyde story, set in the Victorian era but with Batman characters. The Superman monster is set in Bavaria and follows the story of Victor Luthor, a stand-in for Lex Luthor, who is dismissed by the scientific community for his unethical experiments. Luthor, not to take a loss, uses his lover by trying to marry her to use her wealth to fund his experiments. One night, after walking out of a party, he sees a spaceship fall from the sky. This ship is a Kryptonian ship that Kal-El was sent in, but the story differs a bit in that Kal didn't survive the trip. Luthor opens up the ship to find a baby skeleton. I mean, this is pretty bad to begin with, but now Luthor has gained access to all of Jor-El's knowledge, which was ingrained into the shuttle in order to educate Superman. Using this knowledge, of course, he does a bunch of unethical things. One, creating his own version of the monster. While a lot of what happens in the story aligns with the original Frankenstein story, one thing you may notice is that the revival tank that Luthor built is reminiscent of the Kryptonian birthing chamber and really reminds me of the one used in the DCEU when Doomsday was created and Superman was restored to life. I'm not sure if they use this particular story for their inspiration, but it's nice to see these Easter eggs that are reminiscent of a lot of the Superman lore. You get a lot of these nice touches, with the monster he creates becoming a Superman stand-in, as well as the appearance of the Bride of Frankenstein, and Luthor being Luthor, which adds up to a nice quick read that I recommend if you want a classic movie feel. But if you need something more modern that was written more recently, take a look at the next entry. This story takes the zombie trope and spins it in a really different way. Darkseid, after forever, finally gets his hand on the anti-life equation, but because this isn't Final Crisis and DC of course wouldn't rehash the storyline, the anti-life equation becomes corrupted when he tries to pull half of it out of Cyborg so that he can merge it with his half, but the process of the transfer and merging between digital and physical got screwy. This corruption changed the nature of the equation, which to be fair was bad news to begin with, but now it's worse and it infected Darkseid. But this is Darkseid, one of the most powerful characters in all the comics, and now he's a rage zombie. Darkseid basically rages through the universe, infecting everything in his path. Meanwhile, Cyborg, who was also infected, is sent back to Earth, and that virus begins infecting everybody on sight. Soon enough, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman do what they do best and try to save the world, but unfortunately for this Earth, they become infected. Superboy and Robin take on the mantles of their father. Luthor joins forces with the League to help evacuate survivors along with the Green Lantern Corps to take them to another planet dubbed Earth 2, not to be confused with the multiverse concept. Throughout the first series, it was assumed that there was no cure until the readers find out at the end that there's a cure after countless zombified heroes and people were killed. The follow-up sequels explore the cure, the meaning of legacy, but really explores every aspect of the DC universe, from space warfare to magic world-ending demons, and even a team-up with Brainiac. It really is a wonderful piece of work and had a solid writing. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think you guys will too. Well, that's my recommendation for this Halloween season, and if it's the middle of the year when you're watching this and you need to scratch that horror itch, you can take a look at these stories too. Tell me, what do you guys think about these books? And if I missed your favorite, comment below and let me know. And we can always include it in a follow-up. That being said, take care and have an awesome day.